So we now go to the next category, which is the pronoun. Have a quick look at what a pronoun is and then look at a few examples that you might get in the test around this one. So this is what a pronoun is, essentially a word used in place of a noun to prevent us from repeating the same noun too often. So for example, John gave his pen to James, and he. So he here is the pronoun. It's always good to keep examples of what a pronoun is in mind, because instead of learning all these definitions, it's good to know them, but it's quicker to just know that a pronoun is he, she, it, and so on and so on. Pronouns are extensively used on the test, and it's good to be familiar with them and the kind of questions you might get. Several recent studies show that a child born into a family whose members have a history of drug abuse probably themselves abuse illegal drugs later in life. So here, if you try to map what is being referred to, so a child is being referred to. So when the question says they are going to themselves abuse illegal drugs, the themselves refers to the children here. Now a child is a singular and themselves refers to a plural, so the pronoun themselves is the wrong one to use for a child. So based on this alone, we'll have a quick look at the answer choices and see which ones we can eliminate. The original sentence as it stands has a wrong pronoun, so it's wrong. Choice A isn't the right choice. Choice B has changed child to children and children themselves, so potentially this could be correct. We don't know yet. Third one is again child and themselves. Here he's taken out themselves completely. There's nothing really wrong with this sentence in terms of mismatch of pronouns or nouns, so potentially this could be the right one. Choice D is awkward construction, because when it says children will probably abuse illegal drugs themselves, we're not sure whether it's talking about children in these families or children in general. So D is awkward construction, meaning can be interpreted in different ways, hence we mark it out. And E has children and themselves, so potentially E could be correct as well. So we've reduced our choices from 5 to 3. So now let's look at the 3 possible candidates. B says children born into families whose members have a history of drug abuse will probably themselves abuse illegal drugs. Now this sentence is grammatically correct, has no additional extra words, there's no meandering around, and the meaning is clear. This can only mean one thing. So B does remain a strong candidate. Choice C says several recent studies show that a child born into a family, the members of which is a bit awkward and wordy, and basically the test setters do not like this. So whether you come to this conclusion from experience or from just looking at the answer choices or a mix of both, this construction of the words makes choice C inferior to choice B. It's not strictly speaking incorrect, but it's just not as good as choice B, and here we have to select the best answer. There may be more than one answers grammatically correct, but you have to apply the principles that we discussed earlier. The principle of purity, perspicuity, and precision. and as per those, C is inferior to B. So let's cross out C and look at E now. So again, B says children born into families whose members have a history of drug abuse will probably themselves abuse illegal drugs. E says children born into families in which there is a history of illegal drug abuse will themselves probably abuse illegal drugs. Now, simply going by the fact that E is a much longer sentence than B, conveying the same idea, we exclude E as well, and B is grammatically correct and follows the principles of precision. So next we'll move on to verb. Let's take a quick look at what a verb is and then see some examples. Essentially, a verb signifies action. So Tom is drinking. Drinking is a word. John, the table has no verb and it doesn't make sense either, but when you say John strikes the table, the striking of the table becomes a verb. Verbs are of different kinds and we won't go through each of these, but we'll just move on to an example. So here is a typical example. Coal mining and power plants threaten to destroy the Appalachian mountain range in West Virginia, a state well below the poverty line that suffered at the same time as the mining states in the southern United States. So when they say that, they are referring to the state of West Virginia. The word suffered, had suffered, suffering, etc. in the answer choices should alert you to the existence of a possible tense error in the given sentence. The phrase at the same time here refers to a specific time period in the past, and the use of the simple past tense suffered is therefore appropriate. So this sentence seems to hang together just fine and does not seem to have any error. So we come to the conclusion before looking at the answer choices that choice A may be the correct choice. Now let's look at the others. B uses the past perfect tense. If you remember that the present tense threatened to destroy and the past perfect tense cannot go together in the same sentence, you can easily discard B. C unnecessarily introduces the past perfect tense relating to the other mining states in the southern US, which were contemporaneous with West Virginia, and therefore is wrong. D and E both have a pronoun error because the pronoun those does not have an antecedent in the sentence. So we're left with pretty much choice A, which is the correct answer for this question. Our next stop is the adverb. So let's have a quick look at what an adverb is. Adverb is essentially a word that modifies verbs, adjectives, and even other adverbs. So for example, he writes well. He writes is a verb and writes well is the adverb. He is remarkably diligent. So remarkably is the adverb here, and so on and so forth. Moving on to our example of adverb. In the book, the author spoke of a time when houses could not be built straightly, and so it became necessary to have a tool such as a level. So essentially you need to understand what this sentence is saying. Saying essentially that at some time in the past you could not build straight houses, and so you needed to use a tool, a leveling tool, which told you whether the house wall was straight or not. Now this straightly is being used as an adverb, but unfortunately there is no word such as straightly in the English language, because the word straight itself is used both as an adjective and as an adverb. So straightly is incorrect. Any of the answer choices that contain straightly can be marked off. That basically leaves us with two answer choices. The first one is straight. So if you read the sentence with answer choice B, the way it reads is, in the book, the author spoke of a time when houses could not be built straight, and so tools such as the level became necessary. Seems like a perfectly correct sentence. Let's do the same with D. In the book, the author spoke of a time when houses could not be built straight, there being a necessity for tools such as the level. Now this seems to be saying is that tools are a subset of level, whereas level is actually a type of a tool. So this is confusing, and hence B is the correct answer. We now have a quick look at the prepositions, conjunctions, and interjections. Look at the definition, and then look at some typical test problems. A preposition is essentially a connector. So for example, my hand is on the table. In this sentence, the preposition is on because it's showing the relationship between my hand and the table. A conjunction is also a connector, and the key difference with the preposition is that it does not show any relationship. So my father and mother have come, and here is the connector, not really showing any relationship between father and mother, and is therefore a conjunction. Here are some other examples of conjunctions typically used. Interjection is essentially a word that expresses an emotion, a surprise, or a sudden movement. For example, ah, there he comes. Ah is the interjection. So we've now taken a very quick look at the key components of grammar that are useful for the test. Now we will look at specifics for what is tested on the GMAT test. Here are some top tips and strategies to tackle the sentence correction section on the GMAT. First of all, you need to remember that the underlined part of the sentence is the part that contains the error. The other parts will not have any errors and should not be changed. The most common error is no error. This is just statistics. That's the most common answer is A, which basically repeats the sentence as it is. Never choose an alternative that changes the meaning of the sentence. Avoid alternatives that are ambiguous, awkward, or too wordy, repetitive, and so on. If you can't spot the error, don't panic. This is going to happen very frequently as you move up to the closer to the 90 percentile and above. You simply have to mark out the choices which are completely non-suitable, and then compare the ones that are left as to which is the best choice. There may be more than one choices which are grammatically correct, but you have to choose the most appropriate out of those. And of course you need to be aware of the most common grammar and usage errors. Now this is key. You can't be expected to learn the whole of English grammar. You have to focus on the specific errors that the test makers test you on. So let's take a look at the most commonly frequented errors. The first one is a pronoun error. So incorrect statement would be, give me them flowers. Them is a wrong pronoun to use. Give me those flowers, and so on. The plural and singular clause error. Let's take a look at this sentence. Jenny, with her poodle limping behind her, walks to the dog park. Should it be walks or should it be walk? Here the sentence essentially is referring to Jenny, although we also talk about her poodle, so the sentence as it stands is correct, because by using with means that we have to keep the verb singular. Walks is singular and walk is plural. So Jenny walks, but Jenny and her friend both walk to the dog park without the S. And then there are the subject verb errors, misplaced modifier errors. This is a favorite of the test makers. Errors in tense, and so on and so forth. So there are about 20 of these key errors that you might get on your test, and it's good to be aware of some specific examples of each of these. Now what we're going to do is we won't go through each of these in any detail, but we will simply go to some examples, the kind you'll find on the test, and then see how you get to the right answer choice. So let's look at a few examples, some typical examples of the type of questions you'll get in the test, and how you use your grammar knowledge and your knowledge of the standard test traps to address and answer these questions correctly. First one, the walls of the subway have been plastered with light yellow plaster which rob it of its antiquity. Now we need to simply identify what is being referred to here. So when you say rob it of its antiquity, the it is really referring to the walls. So the walls is plural, and so it is really singular. And walls is plural, so there's a mismatch here. It should be replaced by, if you look at the answer choices quickly, you get robs them. So the walls plural are being robbed of their antiquity, so them is the correct usage instead of it. And we have three answer choices which say robs them, so just mark them as yes. So we've quickly narrowed down to three answer choices. Now the key difference is in the usage of the preposition plastered over, plastered with, or plastered by, which is the correct usage. Now this is where your experience and knowledge of the English language comes into play. I mean, the correct usage is plastered over. You don't say plaster with or plaster by. So choice C is the correct answer. By the summer of 1998, normalcy had returned to the less populated states such as Tennessee, which was close to Ohio. This sentence as it stands seems to be correct. There are no obvious errors here. So let's look at the answer choices. The first part of all the answer choices is identical, such as Tennessee. And then you have the differences. This which or this that refers to Tennessee, which was close to Ohio, which is a repeat of the original question, which were close to Ohio. Now this were would be used if there was more than one state you were talking about. You're only talking about one, which is Tennessee. So answer B is not correct. Which is close to Ohio. Now here in the question we're talking about a time in the past, and which is the present, so there's a disconnect here. It should be were or something indicating the past. So choice C is not correct either. Choice D, such as Tennessee, which at the time had been close to Ohio. This is really awkward construction. You don't expect states to move with time. So it's just not the correct one. So that leaves us with A and E, which could be potential correct choices. How do you make a choice between these two? Now the key difference is the use of which versus that. That is normally used only to describe or define an item, not to add additional details to an item, which is Tennessee in this case, that's already been defined. So between choice E using that and choice A using which would be the correct usage? So the right answer is A, which means no change. The next question, the money in nationalized banks is public money, and if it were being lost because industrialists do not repay their loans, the public has the right to know the truth. So looking at the answer choices quickly, you see the key differences: were, was, is, and were. And also in the end, two of the answer choices have because of. So let's say let's try choice D. The money in nationalized banks is public money, and if it is being lost because of industrialists, that doesn't make sense, because of industrialists do not repay their loans. Now this of is redundant. If you wanted to use of, this sentence would have to change, and it would have to be something like, and if it is being lost because of industrialists not repaying their loans, not just repay. Also, something to note is this is the present tense. The money in nationalized banks is public money. It's a statement, a present tense. Whereas the were here and the was here in the answer choices is taking us into past. So you can directly eliminate all the answer choices that are referring to the past. Now something to remember is that if is typically used with a past when it is a case of unreal or contrary to fact cases. But the given sentence is not expressing anything unreal or contrary to fact. Instead, the principal clause is in the present tense, and the subordinate clause is also expressing the continuation of action of the principal clause. The clause beginning with if, therefore, should be in the same tense as the principal clause, because it is expressing a supposition that is assumed to be a fact. And hence you can eliminate all the clauses that are linking it to the past. So were, was, were can be eliminated. Now we are left with just choice C and D, and they are both referring to the present. So the first part of the sentence is common, but D has this additional of, which is the incorrect preposition, and hence option C is the correct answer. The next question. All one can gather from government's initiative on economic reforms are that government is seriously pursuing the second phase of economic reforms. Now what you need to see is the subject all one can gather, and this R is referring to this. Now this all one can gather, the subject is singular, R is plural. this is the problem with this original sentence. So if you look at the answer choices, you'll see which ones correct this error. There may be more errors, but we'll just stop at this for now. So is this is the first one is incorrect. C is incorrect because it's talking about R, and the last one is talking about R as well. So potentially between B and D you have a choice. And again, to repeat, this all one can gather is a clause that expresses a single idea or concept to gather all of something rather than a bunch of some things. That's the key difference, and that's why the choices that refer to this as a plural are incorrect. So A, C and E are not correct. Choice D uses for economic reforms, which is the incorrect preposition. The correct one is on economic reforms. So information not for economic reforms, but information on economic reforms. So the correct answer is B. So here's the next example. George Bush must be the first to rejoice that Bush and Rice both had exonerated in an arms scam by the Supreme Court. Now basically somebody else, a third party, which in this case is the Supreme Court, needs to exonerate you, and that's the correct usage of exonerate. Here it seems like Bush and Rice both had exonerated someone rather than the Supreme Court having exonerated them. So it typically there's something missing, which is Bush and Rice need to be exonerated by the Supreme Court. So the first sentence, as it stands, isn't correct. But if you look at the other examples, it says second one says Bush and Rice both had been exonerated, which is correct as far as this bit is concerned. Had been exonerated, or have been is correct as well, and this doesn't have that, so E has the same error as A on this exonerated. Now we look at choice B, C and D and try to see which one of these can be eliminated further. Now the key difference is the use of both. In choice B, both comes after Bush and Rice, whereas in choice C and D, both comes before them. Now both, when used as an adjective, should be used before the word it modifies. That's a standard rule, and so you can eliminate B. So potentially C and D are the correct choices, and we have to find the best out of these two. The key difference between these two is had been and have been, past and present. Now if you look at this sentence again, the must be refers to something in the present, so the subordinate clause, basically the sentence following it, should be in the present as well, and hence out of these you have D, which is in the present. So D is the correct answer. So here we've used 3-level elimination. At the first instance we got this usage of the word exonerated, and we knew that you have to be exonerated by somebody, by some entity, and as the sentence stands, seems to be indicating that Bush and Rice had exonerated somebody else, which is completely wrong. So we focused on the 3 correct choices with the correct usage of exonerated. And second level elimination was the usage of both. When both is used as an adjective, it should be used before the words it modifies. So we came down to choice C and choice D. And then the third level elimination was the tense. So this main sentence has a tense which is in the present, so the subordinate clause, the following part of the sentence, should be in the present as well. So choice D is what we come to. Hopefully you enjoyed the session, and see you again here soon.